The Deathworlders. A story by user Hambone. Chapter 20. Exorcisms. Part 2. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Ora'u, Uatun. Planet Aru, Elder Space. Lesrie. Oh, now that thing looks like a mover. Lesrie had to admit that it did. If the black sphere which made up probably 80% of the craft's mass was its power core, then even with an old-fashioned distorted space apparent linear velocity drive, it would have been blindingly fast. Lesrie, however, had a few of the high-end firmware upgrades to the implants in his optic nerves that were available only to ranking Directorate scientists, and they were reporting that the ship had one of the black box engines. Which meant, at a very rough mental calculation, that he may well be looking at the fastest vessel in the galaxy. The few rather more refined calculations that he bounced off his cerebral coprocessors confirmed that he almost certainly was. It landed easily enough, settling down to thrum gently on force fields as it finished its descent level with the same bridge that his own history paradox was parked upon, extending a gangplank to link the laughably small amount of ship that wasn't power core to the shore. "Somebody unusual visiting us," he said. "Look busy. If I'm impressed, I might throw in a small bonus." That one never failed to get the hired workers motivated, and they threw themselves into the cataloging and loading as he tucked his thumbs into the belt of his sand robes and took his time wandering over to the end of the arriving ship's gangplank. He wasn't expecting the human who strode down it with an expression that promised serious pain to anything in his way, nor the other two rather paler ones who followed after him shouting what was presumably his name. Nor was he expecting one of the most famous beings in the galaxy behind them. "Well, Counselor Akentenszik, you have a talent for making an entrance," he observed, having to raise his voice to compete with the untranslated barking sounds the humans were making at each other. Akentenszik produced an old-fashioned translation device from a satchel and held it idly in one of his stronger hands as he finished crossing the bridge. "Not by choice," he said. "May I take it that I'm addressing the leader of this expedition? Thank you for meeting me in person." "Co-leader," Lesrie admitted, both intrigued by Akentenzikt's apparent lack of a translator implant and pleased by his manners. Had I known one of the more notorious politicians was coming, I would have torn my colleague Kanadna away from her research as well. And believe me, that's not a risk that a sane being would take lightly. Akentenzik chuckled deep in his lanky throat. "I'm retired now. This is a personal project," he said. "Collecting Deathworlders? Most beings start smaller, with Gricka, or perhaps a pet Vulza. It's an entertaining hobby. I recommend it." Lesrie allowed himself the luxury of a stab of amusement. "Well, the most we have here is an unaccountably sturdy Gowan who wears concealing robes," he said. "She's our chef. I do hope she doesn't turn out to be a human in disguise or something tiresome like that. This expedition will be far less pleasant without her culinary talents." Akentenzik blinked at him. "Information so freely volunteered?" he asked. "My thanks. I suspect that you would have found her more or less instantly anyway," Lesrie said, and inclined his head towards Shu. "After all, she is brandishing a knife at that dark-skinned human you brought with you." Date point. 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Ora'u, Uatun. Planet Aru, Elder Space. "You stay the hell away from me, Zane!" He started to babble at her in that same dense patois, and Xu's temper eroded even further. Shut up, and fuck off!" she screamed. The blonde woman, and oh God, was Xu happy to see a fellow female, stepped forward and said something a little too quietly for Xu to catch. But it did the trick. He paused, then stepped backwards, eyes still fixed on her, then spat in the dirt, spun, and stalked off between the scattering aliens. The blonde woman exhaled, then turned to her. "Xu Chang, I presume," she said. It was so weird hearing somebody pronounce her name correctly. Xiu put the knife down. Hi? She said. It wasn't what she'd imagined saying when she finally got back in touch with the human race. The real human race, not Zane. But then again, nothing in the last 4 years or so had gone like she had imagined. So why should greetings? You've got to be sweltering in that disguise, said another voice, a male one, from slightly behind her. She grabbed the knife and spun, prompting the man who had snuck up on her to back off, raising his hands defensively. Whoa, whoa, he protested. Easy. Easy. Xiu lowered the knife cautiously. This one was hot. Okay, she'd thought the same thing about Zane when they had first met, but this guy... She shook it off. Handsome didn't mean trustworthy, nor did female come to think of it, but if she was ever going to get home, she'd have to trust somebody a little, wouldn't she? She put the knife down again, and Mr. Handsome nodded and circled around to join Blonde Girl. Just making sure you didn't stab him, he said. That didn't exactly endear him to Xiu, but she understood. So you wa me Xiu, she said. That earned her a pair of blank looks until she realized that she'd spoken in Gowan rather than English. Yes. Yes, my name's Xiu, she said. Sorry, it's been since I last... 5 years, not counting that guy? The blonde said, smiling. It's okay. I understand. My name's Allison, and this is Julian. Xiu blinked. I had a friend called Allison, she said. Back on Earth. That detail seemed more relevant in her head than it did in the conversation, but she really was out of her depth here. Would you like to see her again? This Allison asked her. Xiu looked at the ship they had arrived in, and it finally hit her. A ship. They had a ship. And these were humans from Earth who had come here in that ship from Earth. Suddenly, she couldn't see a thing through the tears. They had a ship. She could go home. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Starship Sanctuary. Planet Aru. Elder Space. Lewis. Hey, Amir. Yes? What do you think went down with Xiu and Zane, anyhow? Amir sighed and set aside his checklist. Self-maintaining and robust though Sanctuary's systems were, he felt safer for manually checking them while landed. Why the fascination? He asked. It seems cut and dried to me. You think? I knew men like Zane back in Birmingham, Amir said. All ego, very intense. Charming if they liked you, but if you irritated them. You did? Sure, Amir replied. My cousin was married to such a man. Lewis nodded sagely. Good-looking dude turned on the charm, huh? Got her wrapped around his finger before he turned it off again. Sort of. Arranged marriages didn't go away just because my grandparents left Pakistan, you know. They just brought them to England. Wait, shit, your cousin had to marry some dude? Lewis protested. That's not cool. She didn't have to, Amir corrected him. That would be forced marriage. But the marriage was arranged between his parents and my uncle, and she... He coughed. Well, she didn't think too hard about it. Were you cool with that? Oh, it happened after my abduction. I had the pleasure of meeting the husband after getting back. I didn't like him, and Maliha was a very different person to what I remembered. Very subdued. I'm sure she even flinched a little bit when he raised his voice. So, not cool with it then. Amir sighed. It's a good arrangement, he said. He's a dentist, she cooks, cleans, looks after the 3 children. A traditional marriage. Her parents are very happy. So, you're not cool with it then? She was 16, Amir admitted. Ah, shit. Is that even legal? Oh yes, perfectly legal, Amir said. English law only requires parental consent for 16-year-olds, even if the husband is more like 30. Damn. I get the same vibe off Zane as I do off my cousin's husband, Amir said. That same pride. Is there anything in his file? Let me check, Lewis said, followed seconds later by, Huh. Hey, Kirk encrypted it. He what? Yeah. Locked this shit down tight, too. No breaking it. No way, no how. How do you know it was him? Lewis gave him a tired please look. I'm the only other dude on this boat who could, and I didn't. Amir got out of the flight chair and went to look over Lewis's shoulder. Why would he encrypt Zane's file? I'm going to ask him, Lewis said. Worst case, he says he's not telling us. Go for it. Kirk responded to Lewis's summons a few minutes later. Something come up? He asked. Sort of, Amir said. You encrypted Zane's file? It seemed like a good idea, Kirk replied. I didn't want people to read it and become prejudiced against him. This is supposed to be a welcoming ship. Like, why would we be prejudiced? Lewis asked. Kirk made the noise that was his species' version of a resigned sigh. The Cortai experiments of the last 50 years or so were beginning to focus on human weaknesses, he revealed. Genetic disorders, mutations, personality disorders, mental illness. So our Zane's got maybe a personality disorder of some kind? Amir asked. I'm not saying. I don't want to exacerbate the friction between him and Shu by prejudicing the rest of you against him. All well and good, but if he's dangerous... You're proving my case, Kirk pointed out. You all took an instant disliking to him. That's acceptable. I don't much like him either. But he still deserves his privacy and unbiased treatment. He's not actually done anything other than be unpleasant. Lewis and Amir shared looks that mutually said, he's got a point. All right, cool. You've got a strong argument there, boss, Lewis finally admitted. Thank you. Where is Zane right now, anyway? Lewis ran a search script. Not aboard. Last seen 10 seconds after we landed. He tapped again. Neither's Vedrig, he added. Date point. 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Folktha Colony, Cimbrian. The Far Reaches. Ava Rios. The Tisdale house was a mess. Ava couldn't blame them. In fact, she knew exactly how they felt. After the bomb which killed her parents, it had taken weeks before she began to notice things like mess, rumpled clothing, and the state of her hair again. The first night she had run a brush through it had been a painful one both physically and emotionally, extracting a tangle that had been well on its way to becoming a dreadlock. Dr. Haley Tisdale, at least, was fortunate enough to have straight hair, which would help there. But she was still a mess when she opened the door, wearing food-stained pajamas and red eyes. Ava? Ava lifted the box she was holding. Gabriel was able to get Sarah's stuff back from the military. Haley stared at the box like it was simultaneously the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing in all creation. Oh, can I come in? Haley nodded quietly and stepped inside. The clutter about the place was just stuff. Things that had been left where they were no longer useful. Clothes, mugs, a few bowls and plates, but not many. They weren't eating much. Ava knew how that felt. You just weren't interested. You'd grab books, then discard them, pick things up just to put them down again. There were a lot of wine glasses around, though, and the house reeked of alcohol, plus another scent that she hadn't smelled since high school back in California. She didn't know how that one felt. Ava didn't know how they had even managed to get cannabis on Cimbrian, but she wasn't about to comment. The smell was stale, as if they hadn't indulged for some time. Haley swept aside an arrangement of small crystals and semi-precious stones on the table to make room for the box. Sarah hadn't had much on her when she died, and her blood-stained clothing had tactfully been omitted. What was left was a tiny assortment of jewelry. Sarah had been addicted to rings, and had always worn her birthstone, an emerald, as a necklace. There were a trio of the same kind of crystals that her mother had just swept aside, her phone, spare batteries, and a micro SD card for her camera, and the camera itself. Haley didn't say a word. She just picked up the camera with trembling hands, turned it on after a second's investigation to figure out how it worked, and started to scroll through the pictures her daughter had taken. Ava grabbed a brush and gently started to sort out the worst of Haley's hair, watching the screen herself. It was a catalog of the changing face of Folktha, playing backwards. Brown dirt, tree stumps, and gray construction sites gave way to a bloom of life here and there. Sarah had been gifted with an eye for finding beauty, and for showing it off to its best advantage. Finding little flowering plants that were still struggling gamely against the Deathworld invasion, or the forester whose high-vis jacket and yellow hard hat practically shone against the lifeless stack of felled logs he was leaning against. Things got greener, more alive, and Sarah had continued to pick out whatever was most alive in each scene. A cloud of little iridescent shimmerflies, a creature that lived somewhere halfway between squirrel and lizard, stuffing nuts into a pouch on its back, the curve of Ava's own naked back, the little hairs and the bumps of her vertebrae, luminous with the light of a setting sun that was framed by her coiled lock of wet hair. She hadn't even noticed Sarah take that picture. There were no pictures of Sarah herself, though. She had only ever used the camera to record what happened around her, never turned it on herself. Finally, Haley set the device aside with a sigh. I don't believe it, she confessed. I know, Ava replied. How do you cope? How do I? I think the only thing that keeps me going is that I've still got Jack to look after. Ava's brush never stopped working, but the rest of her did for a second. I think you just have to keep the people you've lost alive, she said. Live for them. Carry on their work. Have you? Haley asked. You lost your parents. Do you think you're keeping them alive? I hope so, Ava said. I try to be somebody they'd be proud of. I tried to get better and move forward because I guess I knew it'd hurt them to see me in pain. Do you think Sarah... Haley aborted the question half-formed. Ava gave her a little hug. She loved you both, she told Haley. She talked about you a lot, about the things you said, about what you taught her. She did? Oh, yeah. Ava laughed slightly. It was hard to get her to stop. That prompted a miserable laugh from Haley, too. She always was a motor mouth. Ava smiled and put the brush down. With the tangles gone and some of her hair's shine restored, Haley was already looking much improved. Hopefully, she'd see that in a mirror, and it would help her just a little. It had for Ava. Haley picked up the camera, and then, unexpectedly, she turned and handed it to Ava. Keep it, she said. Me? Please? It's a way to keep her alive. Ava took the little black device nervously. Are you sure? Haley nodded and then gave Ava a kiss on the forehead. Honey, she said, you're a wiser girl than I am. Maybe you can... She trailed off, then just looked down and shook her head. Just take it, please. I think she'd want you to have it. It just feels right. Carry on her work. Ava considered the picture on the screen at the moment. Cimbrian sunlight, somehow turning the industrial devastation around Folktha pretty just by being framed a certain way, and doubted that she was up to the job. But she had been wondering where to take her life. Now that movie makeup wasn't an option, maybe. Thank you, Haley, she said. She meant it. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Starship Sanctuary. Planet Aru. Elder Space. Xiu. Hitting something felt good. Gung Fu was a martial art, after all. And while practicing the movements had, she hoped, allowed Xiu to keep her form, you could repeat the Bao Hu Guaishan all day, but it couldn't duplicate the feeling and experience gained from landing actual physical blows. The best way to practice punching was, well, to punch something. The fact that it was cathartic had nothing to do with it. Really, nothing. The sanctuary's punching bag was therefore getting the most brutal workout of its existence. While the Gowans could have easily built one for her, she had never asked for one. It would have been too embarrassing to break the first few and too impolite to flaunt just how much stronger she was than them by doing so to a bag it would have taken 3 of them to lift. Now, though, she could feel just how long it had really been since she had last received proper guidance in her form. Her wrists and forearms hurt, and in the first few minutes she threw a few strikes where she misjudged the distance, and either punched the air just short of the bag's surface, or else overextended herself, striking a point somewhere inside it. She wasn't off by much, but she was still off, she could tell. She only finally ended her workout once she was satisfied that she had restored some of her muscle memory and that her form had healed a bit, by which point she had spent nearly an hour focused on that one task, giving her brain time to process the news about San Diego and the devastation that its destruction had wrought on the entire Pacific coast. Nobody had been directly hurt in Vancouver, thank goodness, but the ash from Mount Rainier's sympathetic eruption, caught by a prevailing wind from the desert, had dusted across British Columbia and even as far as Alaska, causing respiratory distress, clogging air filters and lightly polluting the water across thousands of square miles. She hoped that it hadn't set off Way's asthma. Julian and Allison had admitted to both knowing the specifics of what had happened, but had also said that, so long as Xiu intended to leave the ship and return home, they weren't in any kind of a position to discuss it. It was a mystery, but one that Xiu would happily forego illumination of for the sake of going home. As for all the dead, well, it didn't register. It wasn't that it didn't seem real. They had shown her the footage and news reports, too many and varied to be fake. It was definitely real, but it was also abstract. She didn't even know what 2 million living people looked like, let alone 2 million dead. The mind simply couldn't get a grasp on ideas that big. She jogged a few laps around the gym to warm down, then collected her boots and headed upstairs, wondering what kind of food they had on board. The clothing she'd been given was really impressive, made of some high-tech performance textile that had kept her cool and dry and not noticeably aromatic, and it was made by humans, for humans, understanding human needs. Luxury. With luck, the galley would be similarly impressive. Upstairs, however, the crew were talking quietly and their expressions were worried. When she entered, Allison stopped speaking mid-sentence and gave her a gently apologetic smile that said while she, Allison, was glad to see her, Xiu had managed to arrive at an inopportune moment. "Is everything all right?" Xiu asked. "Sunset was half an hour ago, and we've not seen Zane since you came aboard," Kirk told her. She hadn't had the opportunity to get to know the tall, white being yet. It wasn't that he had ignored her, but he seemed to be extremely busy with something or other and had given her only a polite welcome aboard and his assurance that they would become acquainted later on if she liked. "Pfft, Zane? Leave him behind," Xiu said. It came out as more of a snap than she had intended, but she had to stop her hand from touching the mark on her throat. "Even if we were inclined to do so," Kirk said, making it very plain that he wasn't, "we just found out that Vedrig isn't aboard either." "Vedrig? You ever met a Govnagun dragon bunny?" Lewis asked. "Oh, you have a—" Xiu asked, ignoring Kirk as he tried to correct Lewis. "I didn't see them." "He went straight into the city when we landed. Said that he was testing a theory," Amir revealed. "You were too busy waving knives at Zane and Julian to notice." Xiu blushed. Julian snuck up on me, and Zane—" She paused. "Is missing," Kirk reminded them. "Well, what do we do?" Julian asked. "We search for him," Kirk said. "Julian, you and Amir can sweep the north quadrant. Allison, you and Lewis take the east. Miss Chang—" "No." Shu folded her arms. Kirk blinked. "I see," he said. "Not to press the issue, but I understand that you're rather physically formidable yourself, and—" "No!" There was silence as everyone glanced back and forth at one another, which Lewis broke by clearing his throat. Hey, the hell happened with you two?" "That's between me and Zane," Shu told him. "If you need me, I'll come running. But that—" She shook her head. "Just— no." Kirk lowered his head, exhaling slowly. "I can see that is the end of it. Very well. Amir, if you could accompany me instead." Amir finally stopped giving Shu a calculating stare and nodded. "Okay," he agreed, though reluctantly. Allison stood. "Sooner we get moving," she said. "I'll be in my room," Shu said. She held it together until the door was closed and locked behind her before the shakes started. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Classified facility: Earth. Steve. "Shitty luck. You got that right," somebody said as he entered. Steve sighed and grabbed a coffee. "It was a fucking understatement," he replied. Christoph Lehman, the poor bastard who'd been puppeted into shooting a girl on Cimbrian, had not taken the explanation of his situation well. There had been shouting, there had been crying. Both had been easier to bear than the dreadful, broken silence. "I think it's pretty clear he needs to be on the suicide watch list," Carl said. "Pretty clear, yeah. Fellow looks like he took a dump and found his liver in the bowl. Give the man some respect, Simmons. News like that'd be rough on anybody." "Sorry, boss." Boss nodded. "Guess he's headed to Alaska, then." "Oh, yes," Steve said. "That implant the Cortai shoved in him may have cured his epilepsy, but it's too deep and invasive to remove. He'd be a lobotomized vegetable once the surgeons were done, assuming he even lived through the operation." "Then there's his reputation," Simmons pointed out. "Poor bastard was used to murder a little girl. No way to explain that one to the public without ruining him or blowing the lid on the hierarchy." Boss shifted in his seat. "I'm going to be advising the director that we can't keep that particular secret much longer," he drawled. His Georgia accent always got stronger when he was feeling emotional, though that was the most sign he gave. "There's too much pressure now. The seizure all the people with translators had, San Diego, now this? The internet's already working overtime."
"Isn't there some plausible deniability there?"
Balistreri had always fallen comfortably into the role of devil's advocate. She wasn't actually an argumentative woman by nature, but she had a knack for spotting the alternatives and presenting them.
"If the story leaks, then we can just claim too much time spent listening to the internet conspiracy theorists."
"Nope. Only a matter of time before Herr Lehman gets his case taken up by a journalist or a human rights lawyer. The cat'll be out of the bag before long. You mark my words. But if we let it out ourselves, then the details of Operation Exorcist can remain secret."
"You're the boss.
"Yep. What happens if the hierarchy do panic and step up their plans? At least we'll have taken the initiative," Carl said, "rather than playing catch-up." "Best we can do," Boss agreed. "All right, folks. Get some rest, do your paperwork, whatever. I'll see y'all when I get back from D.C. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Ora'u Uatun. Planet Aru. Elder Space. Allison Bueller. If there was one thing Lewis was terrible at, it was taking a hint once he was fixated on a train of thought. "Seriously, though, what do you think? Do you rape her or something?"
"She doesn't want to say, and that's the end of it,"
Allison told him. It was cold in the desert at night.
She'd known that, but still hadn't quite registered that the temperature would be in a free fall within minutes of sunset. She was almost mentally counting down until the frost fog started to appear on her breath. It didn't help that the deserted city had an eerie, unsettling quality to it. If the place had been truly abandoned, plants growing all over everything, walls falling down, that kind of thing, then it wouldn't have been so bad. But the place was still slightly alive, thanks to the automated maintenance and civil engineering systems that the Oma-Aru had laced through the ancient conurbation at the height of their power. Everything was still clean, still standing, just empty. It was almost like walking through our own home city of Phoenix, except that the road signs were alien, the proportions were wrong, and the silence. It was cloying. It stuck to everything. The desert breeze and the hiss of sand only seemed to amplify the silence rather than dispel it. And when occasional little animals or robots moved around in the dark, it set every ancient monkey danger instinct in her body off. She'd always hated the dark. "You gotta speculate, though, right?" Lewis persisted. Allison stopped and grabbed his arm. Hard, prompting a wince and a noise of complaint. "Lewis, shut up." She let go and listened, ignoring Lewis as he rubbed his arm and made irritated sub-vocalizations. There was definitely noise and a glow coming from a nearby building. "Zane? That you?" she called, grateful for a chance to have something other than Lewis's insensitive speculation to break the silence. It wasn't Zane. Instead, an Oma-Aru shuffled out into the street, raising a glowing white stick. Aliens came in all shapes and varieties, and the temptation was always there to compare them to mixtures of human species back on Earth. Blue giraffes, white zebra giraffes, raccoon persons, and so on. It was always an unfair and inaccurate comparison. They were their own species, the products of evolution that had nothing to do with Earth. But comparison with leopard geckos and big-eared bats sprang to mind anyway when considering an Oma-Aru. This one was about twice Allison's height, and shrouded in robes against both the sand and the cold night air. Its skin, dry, tough, and scaly, was the color of the desert, mottled here and there with patterns of a surprising turquoise and ochre hue that became thicker and more vivid around the base of its huge, furry ears. The tufted end of its tail ticked back and forth behind its back, folding over into a question mark. "Umua? Wanuatu? Wouem wioyu?" it asked. "Ba weep grana weep ninibang, dude," Lewis replied amicably, and offered the alien a Vulcan salute for good measure. Allison rolled her eyes and put a hand over her mouth to cover her smile. "Umuamo? Suuama?" "Sure, dude. Whatever. Guess there's no point in asking if you saw a big black dude who talks even weirder than you go past, huh?" "Huh?" "Huh. Guess huh is a universal, huh?" "Huh." The alien disappeared into the building again. "Lewis, you've got a talent for communication there." The sentence was barely out of her mouth when the Oma-Aru returned and handed Lewis a little dull gray metal ball about the size of an apple. "Huh?" "Huh!" The tail lashed and its ears perked up. Allison got the distinct impression that a human would have been nodding vigorously and smiling. "Oh! Huh! Well, thank you very much, my man." "Wem, uei," the alien agreed. "Ming mang mong, dude," Lewis told it. Allison watched the alien return, apparently happily to its domicile. "The fuck?" "Hell if I know," Lewis said, pocketing the gift. "Nice guy, though." "What do you think that thing is?" "You heard the dude. It's a huh." "Lewis? Well, how the fuck am I supposed to know? Could be the dude's car keys. Could be his porn stash. Could be his grandma's ashes." Allison sighed. Okay. She raised her torch and looked down the street, expecting and receiving no sign of any living thing beyond the pool of light where the giver of the huh was living. "No sign of anything where we're at, Kirk," she said, activating the contact microphone by pressing lightly on it where it was stuck to her throat. "I was just about to let you know we found them," Kirk replied. "You did?" "Both of them, yes. Vedrig believes that he may have uncovered a breakthrough in the mystery of elder species decline. He has? Vedrig's simulated voice, the translators always rendered him with a gentle, received pronunciation accent for some reason, came on the line.
Oh, yes. Do you see the large, lit building at the apex of the Oxbow Lake?
Allison looked around. It was hard to miss in the dark. Sure. You're there?
Indeed. If you could collect the others and bring them here, they may wish to see this.
Julian?
I heard. Shu's still lurking in her cabin, so I'll meet you there. Ah, shit!
Allison frowned. Problem?
Yeah, my foot broke again.
Allison sighed. Julian insisted that the prosthetic was perfect for his needs in terms of moving around and stepping silently, but it achieved that by being a near-exact replica of the human foot made using carbon fiber bones, and its flesh was a synthetic muscle tissue that Julian called myopolymer. It worked just fine when it worked. Unfortunately, the same alien materials science that made Kirk's prosthetic by far his strongest limb didn't quite match the performance standards of a healthy human body in terms of both weight and strength. Julian's decision to go for accurate movement and mass rather than high performance so as to minimize his rehabilitation training time meant that he periodically suffered the equivalent of tendon ruptures and stress fractures. "Do you need us to help you back?" she asked.
Nah, it's a field repair. Price I pay, I guess.
The advantage to a prosthetic foot, of course, was that he could perform the equivalent of surgery on it himself with glue. "See you soon, then."
Sure.
Lewis spent most of the walk examining his poking it and turning it over and over in his hands. Allison was pretty sure he surreptitiously licked it at one point, all with no apparent effect. It was an improvement on his speculating about Shu. Kirk, Vedrig, Zane, and Amir were waiting for them in the street. Both the humans were hunched over and shivering, from standing around in the plummeting temperature with nothing to keep themselves warm, and Kirk was fidgeting in the cold. But Vedrig's species had evolved to spend a week every year standing around in the driving rain of the world storm. He seemed perfectly comfortable, producing great monsoon clouds with every exhalation.
"Ah, there you are,"
he exclaimed, upon laying eyes on Allison and Lewis.
"Come and see."
Allison looked upwards. "It's a building," she said, though it was an admittedly impressive one, taller and more sprawling than any other around it, and looking quite clean, well-maintained and lit, compared to its neighbors.
"It's a hospital," Vedrig corrected her.
"And we're going to find the secret to species decline in there, are we?" Vedrig turned and spread his arms to indicate the city and its surrounding sprawl of infill as a whole.
"A hospital this large has catchment for the entire river valley," he said. "It should be absolutely thriving with activity. Should it not? Despite the much reduced population, some 100,000 souls still live inside this hospital's coverage."
Allison nodded yes, then remembered that without translators she had better do Vedrig the courtesy of speaking aloud. "Sure," she said.
"And yet, no ambulances are landing."
Vedrig indicated the dormant landing pads.
"The ground vehicle parking area is all but completely empty. No pedestrians are coming or going. The injury and emergency department is silent. Clearly the Oma Aru who live around here don't care in the slightest about their own health. And yet the building remains open. The power is still on, and the reception drone is ready to receive and help."
"Automated?" Lewis asked. "The staff parking," Kirk chimed in, "is not vacant. Somebody is still at work inside." "Who?" Kirk's imitation of a human shrug was getting better with practice, but his extra limb still made the gesture look strange. "Unfortunately, I don't read Oma Aru." "Huh," Allison mused. Lewis laughed. "Don't start that shit again," he warned. His admonition earned a wry huff from Allison, and baffled expressions from everyone else. So he explained, producing the "huh" to show off, passing it around. Vedrig and Kirk promptly fell to debating its meaning and significance, while Zane just inspected the little object, turning it over in his hands. Allison sidled over to Amir, who had been silent so far, staring up at the hospital. "Thoughts?" she asked.
50 quid says the cybernetic wards turn out to be open. And the hierarchies behind it, Amir challenged her. Wiping out whole species when they start to become a threat seems like their style, doesn't it?
"And with an advanced species whose heads are going to be full of implants like the Oma Aru," Allison mused, following his line of reasoning. "No bet. Have you?" Something very painful happened to the back of her head. Date point: 4 years, 9 months, and 3 weeks after Vancouver. Scotch Creek Extraterrestrial Research Facility, British Columbia, Canada. Earth. Captain Owen Powell.
Hello, Captain. Major Tony Ford. It's nice to meet you.
Major?
Powell looked around the office as he shook the psychiatrist's hand, finding it uncomfortably familiar to the other ones he had visited for counseling in his career. The couch was different, though. Long, low, and square. A sofa rather than a psychiatrist's couch. He appreciated that.
Guess I sit there, do I?
Major Ford smiled slightly and shook his head. "If you want, or over there on the floor, walk around. You can even sit at my desk and I'll sit on the couch if you like. There's coffee and tea if you want them."
"I'll take the couch, thanks. And, yeah, a cup of tea would go down about right."
Ford nodded. "A Yorkshire man like yourself, I'm thinking strong and sweet?" he asked, smiling. Powell produced a very, very little tired laugh through his nose.
"Aye, you've got me bang to rights there,"
he said. Ford made the drinks quietly, giving Powell time to settle in and get the measure of the room a bit more. On second glance, there were personal touches everywhere, not least of which was a dog basket in the corner, in which a dark little terrier was sat, watching him with wide-eyed interest. Her tail flopped over uncertainly in response to the attention. "Oh, that's Peggy," Ford said. "Don't worry, she's as good as gold. Won't even leave the basket without permission," he added fondly, smiling at her as he handed over the tea.
"I'm not going to wind up talking to the dog, am I?"
Powell asked. "Not if you don't want to. But she's half the partnership and there if you need her."
"Aye, let her out."
"Come on, Pegs, say hi," Ford ordered. The dog bounced happily across the room and sat in front of Powell, giving his hand a little lick as he scratched her ear.
"Were you always a psych, Major?"
he asked, noticing a few other personal effects around the office, one of which was unmistakably a large piece of shrapnel. "No, I cross-trained," Ford said, settling back down at his desk. "I was escorting EOD teams on my first 2 tours."
"Nice one,"
Powell said, genuinely impressed.
"But why the move?"
"We lost a man. They never did figure out exactly why that car bomb went off. They thought the robot had made it safe, but, well, everyone took it hard. I coped best by helping the others, and from there I decided to switch career paths." Powell nodded. "What about you? Did you sign up intending to go into the SBS from the beginning?"
"Aye, I did."
"What attracted you to it?" Powell sipped his tea.
"My old man's sister was an A&E nurse at Sheffield Teaching Hospital. She had these stories about when they sent the SAS lads along there for medical training in the 70s.
Ford listened, drawing him to continue.
"Okay, so this is all second-hand, but apparently one of them was really fond of his motorbike, and one day after shift, he went out there and found it had been stolen."
"Oh, dear."
"Aye. Apparently, he turned up on it next day, and all he'd say on the subject was, 'He won't do that again.'"
Powell chuckled, then paused and scratched Peggy's ears some more.
"When I were little, I used to think that was well cool. Fucking unprofessional is what I'd call it nowadays."
"Is that what attracted you to the service? Stories like that?"
"At first, I wanted to be hard, you know, be a tough bastard. That's what got me into the cadets. Then I saw all me mates getting into trouble with the law, or their parents losing their jobs, and I could see this career ahead of me if I stuck at it. It was only later, really, that I started to believe in the message, right? Keeping our country safe, making the world a better place.
Peggy gave him a lick as he looked down at her and scratched at her ear again.
Shall we get started?
He asked. If you like, Ford said. What happened?
What happened?
Powell exhaled.
A kid died. You're briefed, right?
About the hierarchy? Yes.
Right. Well, emergency mission. Hierarchy in the colony doing something dodgy down the starport construction site. One of the kids had snuck in there to try and take a picture. We mobilized. We're there in less than 2 minutes. Swept the site. We nearly had the bastard when he shot her.
Peggy made a little noise and shuffled a touch closer to him, warm against his leg. He couldn't resist the urge to pet her some more.
10 fucking seconds,
he said.
Less than. 7, maybe. If we'd been there 10 seconds earlier.
Could you have done anything differently?
No.
Powell shook his head.
I've gone over it. We did everything bloody perfect. I can't bear to tell them this, but my lads pulled out the best day's work they've ever done. There's not a single fucking learning point in the entire bloody operation. Perfect.
He sighed.
And we still get there 10 seconds too late.
I'm interested. Why can't you tell them?
Well, what's that going to achieve?
Powell asked.
Sometimes there's not enough silver fucking lining in the world.
And that's hard to accept?
No. That part I can accept. Failure's always an option no matter how well you do. That's not what hurts.
Hurts?
I'm injured.
Powell replied.
Sure as if I'd been shot in the gut. One of my men had to chew me the fuck out for me to come in here.
Do you think he was right to?
Abso-fucking-lutely,
Powell asserted.
I've been beating myself up, losing sleep, taking it out on the lads. I've been a bad commander the last few days, and that's got to fucking stop.
You sound angry at yourself.
Yeah, I am. I thought I was just angry at the hierarchy, but no, fuck that. I am angry at them. And at myself, and at...
He fidgeted, then patted the dog when she whined at him. Ford gave him a minute, then suggested softly, Anger can be constructive.
Yeah,
Powell said.
I know that. Me and anger are old friends. We get on just fine, mostly. And I reckon that's what's given me trouble, is that it's not constructive to be angry with the person I'm most mad at.
Who? Powell picked up the dog.
The girl.
He told her, very softly.
I'm angry at the victim.
All right, guys, that's going to be it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate you being here. And like, comment, subscribe if you feel like it. Click the Patreon link right there as it's popping up. And yeah, I appreciate you guys. I love you. I will talk to you later. Bye, y'all. Do you know the Muffin Man? All right, that's all I got. These are going to be hard.